So I get the opportunity to introduce Bryan Jorgensen. Bryan was an active member of the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition, beginning with its inception in 2015 through 2020. Bryan holds a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanized Agriculture from South Dakota State University, which he earned in 1987, and is a partner in Jorgensen Land and Cattle, a fourth-generation family-owned and operated farm and ranch. The partnership includes Bryan's brother Greg, nephew Cody, and son Nick. Together they run a hunting lodge, diverse cow-calf and bull development operation, as well as farm 12,000 acres no-till crop operation growing feedstuffs, feed grains, and certified seed. Soil health practices utilized by Jorgensen throughout his operation include no-till, cover crops, diverse crop rotations, as well as livestock integration. He is also an active member he's also active in groups such as the South Dakota Crop Improvement Association, Nutrient Research and Education Council, Tripp County Water Users District Board of Directors, as well as the USDA NRCS Voices for Soil Health and Soil Health Mentoring. Jorgensen's vision for the future of soil health is to maximize production efficiency of our soil while regenerating the soil for future generations. Please help me in welcoming Bryan Jorgensen.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Good, good. First of all, this is a tough time to do a presentation right after a big, healthy, happy lunch. So I won't be offended if I see some nods like this. I'm going to try and not have that happen, but it might. So I won't be offended if I see that. But thank you for that great introduction. Where that star is, that's where our operation is. We generally call that the Banana Belt or South Central South Dakota. It's about 180 miles due west of here. If you go on 57th Street in Sioux Falls, that's basically 265th Street. That's where our farm is. So if you could drive literally straight west off 57th, you'd end up in our operation about 180 miles. So we are in a pretty arid climate, a lot like Danny's environment. We are West River. We generally get around 20 to 21 inches of rain every year. Believe it or not, we were in a drought year this year, but we actually got 23 inches of rain. But it all came at the inappropriate time. So we were in a drought basically from July until December, which was a major part of our fall growing season. So we didn't even get winter wheat out of the ground this year. So it was a very dry year for us. But if you look at it from the average point of view, we're above average. So figure that out. Anyway, as he said, I have 3 partners. This is a family-owned operation. The guy on the right there is my brother Greg, his son Cody, and then my son Nick, and then myself. Cody is the Chief Livestock Operations Officer. I'm the Chief Agronomy Operations Officer. And Nick is essentially our boss. He's our CFO and CEO. So he's got a lot of plates in the air. He's also on the National Farm Credit Board. He's got a lot of stuff going on. He's got 4 little boys from the age of 7 down. Man, he's got a lot of stuff going on. But he is a huge part of our operation right now. He's driving it forward very, very quickly. And Greg and I are both on the sunsetting side of the equation. We're looking for the exit door, and Nick is he's just coming in full steam. So we make up a lot of different characteristics in our personalities. So that really gives our whole operation the diversity that it needs. So, as he said, we farm, give or take, about 12,000 acres. Depends on what leases expire and what new ones we pick up. But generally speaking, about 12,000 plus or minus acres. But as you can see, it's very diverse. We have, in any given year, about 2,000 acres of winter wheat and about 3,200 acres of corn. And that kind of makes up most of our rotation. However, there's a lot of other things in there as well. In any given season, we might plant, including the cover crop species, about 28 to 30 different species of crops within that rotation. That's not mixed together, but I mean, if you think about that from a diversity standpoint, that's a very diverse system. We also are very blessed to have about 8,800 acres of native pasture. And that really has been a blessing for me, not because I'm not a cow guy. I love the livestock, I love the animals, but my passion's have always been agronomy. But pastures have taught me a lot. Taught me a lot more than any professor or any soil scientist, I think if you learn to watch the behavioral patterns of our native pastures, that in and of itself will teach you just about everything you need to know about bringing that same system back to the cropping side. So we're very blessed to have those. And by the way, we do manage those very intensely. In the early parts of the grazing season, we'll move cows about every 3 to 4 days. And we've got an established plan already in place going into the grazing season. The only thing that will change that is lack of moisture. That may stretch those grazing days out as we get more moisture or less moisture. But by and large, we've got a very intense grazing plan going into the season. We've got about 1,100 Angus cows, which we call our foundation cow herd. They're all registered Angus. And from that, we produce about, in a year's time, if you consider the pyramid of cattle that we affect, about close to 220,000 offspring. And I don't have time to explain how that works, but that's when they're a bull business like we are in. The cow herd is what creates the top pyramid of that genetic pool to produce all the bulls that we market in a year's time. So it's a very, very key part of our operation. It's about 80% of our business. So Cody's the one in charge of developing and maintaining that cow herd. We also have a 4,000 head CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, that is strictly bulls, not steers, not heifers, not feedlot type to finished feedlot. It's a conditioning bull facility. And we market about 5,000 plus animals. This year, we're going to approach about 5,400 bulls that we will market through that facility. We also have a certified seed business. We market about 25,000 bushel of winter wheat seed, about 15,000, give or take, of spring wheat seed, and about 60,000 bushels of oat seed every year. So that's one way that we can really value add the commodities that we grow and don't feed. And as he mentioned, we also have a hunting lodge that we built from scratch back in 2012. We really never wanted to get into the hospitality business, if you will, but we bought the property that it sits on, and that previous owner had an existing hunting business, so we just basically took that model, bred it with the hunting model that we had at the time, which was just a day hunt, and we came up with the concept of the lodge. And so it's all about people throughput, just like a hotel. But what it has done for us is it has given us an opportunity to become ag ambassadors on our very own operation. So every hunting group that comes through, and there's roughly 450 hunters that we take in every season, that we can take through and give them a tour of our entire operation and give them some fundamental understanding of where their food comes from, and also the importance of soil health. And so because of the lodge, we've been able to impact a lot of non-agricultural people. And they remember those things, and they truly appreciate having an understanding of where their food comes from and what it takes to get it there. So it's been pretty cool. So really what we're dealing with, I think, in agriculture is a carbon revolution. So what you hear now, everything's carbon, 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 right? And I think in a sense that's okay. I don't really truly believe from a scientific standpoint that we should be spending trillions of dollars to try and capture carbon when Mother Nature can do it for nothing. But that's where we are, okay? We just have to learn how to deal with that. But I really think that soil health is going to drive the management moving forward in our operations, because we all now have a sense of awareness. When we think about any of us in this room that are in production agriculture, there's enough information out there that we are exposed to, that we have at our disposal, that when you do something on your land, you are thinking now, is this the right thing to do? A generation ago, that wasn't the case. It was all production driven. We didn't really have a sense or an awareness of soil health like we do today. Reducing carbon, I think that's really, and that's in our system, that's what we struggle to try and do. Reducing the amount of carbon that actually gets moved off an acre of land and how much it takes to replace that carbon. We are in the feeding business. We feed 250,000 pounds of feed a day when our CAFO is full. That's a lot of feed. So we have to figure out how to take that off that acre of soil without diminishing the soil system itself. And that's been our biggest challenge, okay? Lowering fertilizer and chemical input load. That's an economic thing that we have found that we've been able to do. Guess what? It's going to become a political thing. It already is. Nitrous oxide, that's going to be the next big thing. So they're going to force us to do things. We want to be in a position that we can do that without having to sacrifice yield or profitability, okay? Using biology and foliar feeding, we've been doing that since the mid-1990s, back when it was still snake oil. A lot of people still consider it to be snake oil. I think those technologies are fantastic, but they are not silver bullets. Understand that. Diversifying crop species, I think, again, if you understand the 5 pillars, five fundamental things of soil health, that's definitely one of the most important. Livestock integration, we've been doing that since the set-aside days of the 1980s. When you had to have so many acres set aside, we'd plant to a forage crop and we'd put cattle on it. So we've been doing that for 35, 40 years. And more regenerative practices. Simply trying to build the system rather than just sustain it or deplete it. It's really about rebuilding it to make it better for the next generation. Our journey began in the mid-1980s. If you noticed, I was the one that was the 40-year guy. Well, technically I'm right. Hush, Sherry, I'm not talking to you. Technically I'm right. We started a no-till quarter section in 1983. I was a senior in high school. Was it successful? Absolutely not. It was not. We didn't have the planters, we didn't have the herbicides, we didn't have any understanding of what we were doing. But we had a neighbor who was trying it as well. And so between the two of us, we collaborated and did some funny things. But that was 40 years ago. We really then, from that point, just started building on it. And by 1991, we were 100% no-till. Incidentally, that was the year that my son was born, Nick, so he's known nothing else but no-till. Tillage to him is foreign. He doesn't understand it. Conceptually, he goes, why would anybody do such a silly thing? But he was born into a no-till system. We weren't really looking to improve soil quality. It wasn't an issue for us. We weren't thinking about soil health. That wasn't a term. We were driven by saving moisture and saving money. Because we knew that tillage, because we were a fallow area, we knew that when it rained heavily, we'd lose soil, we'd lose moisture, we'd lose money, okay? We were spending a lot of money tilling. We were spending a lot of money making multiple passes over the field. So the decision to start switching to no-till was really driven by saving moisture and saving time and fuel. As soon as we started doing that, we started to expand the rotation because guess what? We ended up with more time, more moisture, and so naturally we just started to upload the system. Started to crank it up, if you will. No longer did we do fallow wheat and milo. We started inducing other crops, and it just started to grow on itself. The mid-1990s were cranking pretty good. I mean, we had a pretty good system, but I was frustrated with the nutrient system because we were still going out, taking soil tests, getting an evaluation and recommendations from a soil lab, and they were still saying you got to have X amount of nutrient for X yield. That is an old paradigm way of thinking. Crop uptake. I knew there had to be a better way. There has to be a better way of evaluating those soils to their fullest capacity. And I came upon a company in the mid-1990s that helped us understand soil balance, and crop uptake was no longer an issue. And so it's been since that time that we've really grown and enhanced what those soils can do. We saw the importance of soil balance, letting Mother Nature fill in the cracks. And from that, we've been able to get a high level of confidence in lowering the amount of applied products that we put out there. Today, we strive to do the 5 pillars. And everything that we do, we think about, how is this going to impact our crop diversity? How is this going to impact our soil armor? Can we get livestock on this? It comes in every part of our crop planning. It comes in every aspect of it. We're thinking all the time about the 5 principles of soil health. It's become inherent. Learning from the prairie, as I mentioned earlier, my greatest teacher. If you really think about how Mother Nature works, that prairie system is a natural rotation. It's been doing it for thousands of years, successfully. It has high organic matters, and you're gonna kind of catch a drift that I talk about organic matter a lot. But that's really important to understand, that the natural organic matter levels of our prairie soils are between 4 and 7%. So naturally, that should be my goal back on the crop side, right? So that's how we look at things. It also has a very diverse set of plant species that rotate and mingle through a rotational system based on the environment that's in. But there's always something different growing out there. It's resilient. It has a natural nutrient cycle. In other words, it doesn't need us to apply a bunch of product for it to produce. Somehow or another, it does its own cycling system. It's done it for thousands of years, right? As long as it's managed properly. It's resilient in all weather extremes. If you treat it like it should be treated, it will do just fine, even in tough years. Our year was tough last year. We had good moisture early, but the season got really hot and dry. We carried our cows well into October with no trouble, and we left plenty of grass out there. So we've learned to manage those native systems very, very well. Could we do better? Oh yeah, we could always do better. But the point is, we had neighbors that had pastures that looked like this tabletop in June or July. Those pastures are going to take years to recover. Ours, we hope with this snow, we'll be back in the ball game next spring. Perpetually active root system. 365 days a year, that root is alive and sustaining life in that soil. Extremely important. Bioactive. And because of that root system, it is bioactive. It's got biology in it that is sustained because there's a living root capturing sunlight energy. Okay? It's a perfect plant-soil relationship. Symbiotic. Okay? Everything happens for a reason. So just remember that Mother Nature has a system, and all we've done is screw it up. It has proven sustainability as long as there's livestock involved. And I'll give you a case in point. Everybody's talking about cattle being our environmental problem, when in fact I would argue that cattle are fundamentally important to sustain life on Earth. The rumen is that important in the ecosystem. And I'll give you a case in point. We had a landowner that bought property that had pasture. He was a hunter, so he wanted as much ground as he could possibly get for hunting, which meant he didn't want cows out there during nesting season because he thought the cows were going to impact pheasant production. Well, he got so adamant that he said, I don't want any cows. So we took cows off the property for 5 years. And wherever there was native pasture, it turned to brome grass. And we're still trying to battle that today, trying to get rid of those mistakes of not having enough room and capacity out there to control that system, and it went to hell. So just remember, in nature they had the buffalo, okay, and all the animals and the deer, everything else, and you take that component away from it, and you're going to have an upset apple cart. What did it teach us? Well, isn't it curious that all the things that we've learned over the last 40 years all fall into these 5 categories? Soil armor is essential in protecting that soil beneath it from erosion and evaporation. If you go out in that pasture, there's a good solid inch to inch and a half of that. It's almost like a carpet mat you can pull up. And that's what's protecting that soil surface. I like to see the same thing on the crop ground if we can achieve it. No-till was the only way for us to achieve low soil disturbance. The only way. And we tried everything. We tried hoe drills, we tried all kinds of different things. You know, one of the worst things we had was the Noble blade. I think most of you know what I'm talking about, the big V plow. God, that thing looked like it was doing such a great job. All the stuff on the top looked like it was perfectly undisturbed. When you first inch of rain you get and the whole thing goes sliding off. That was one of the most destructive tools I have ever seen in our operation, beyond a disc. And so that got its wheels taken off of it real quick in our operation. So we needed to add the diversity to the system. We learned that early on. We couldn't just do the few crops that we were doing because we had too much water. In an arid climate, we had too much water. So we learned that we had to diversify it. We also needed the living roots to support the biology. We didn't know it at the time, but we know it now. We learned early on, though, that we could drive on a crop or drive on ground that had a living root on it far before we could drive on one that didn't have a living root. In fact, I made a believer out of a western Kansas farmer one time. He was at our place, and I said, I want to show you something. And it had rained 2 inches. And we couldn't go down the dirt trail because it was gumbo. So we went around the gravel road to a wheat field, drove off, and drove right into the wheat field after 2-inch rain. This guy said, you're frickin' nuts. You're going to get us stuck. I said, no, we're not. Drove right out in that wheat field and stopped, got out, walked around. He says, I don't even have mud on my shoes. What the hell's going on here? I said, that soil has structure, just like a native pasture. And that light bulb was about this big on his head. It was incredible. So, and that's really just the fact that we had a living root in the system and we had aggregated soil. And finally, integrating livestock. And I'll show you some numbers here in a little bit, but it's convinced us that we've got to try and get a hoof on every acre if we can. Rotations, I've got a basic rule of 2 years in of any given crop species and at least 2 to 4 years out of that. I would like to be able to just do multiple species all the time like the native system does, but that's really not possible in the model that we're running in. So the next best thing we can do is at least 2 years in, at least 2 to 4 years out. And this would be an example of that. So you've got cool season grass, cover crop, warm grass, warm broadleaf, or cool broadleaf. So in a sense, we've got a 6 or 7 year rotation there, okay? So a good example would be oats to winter wheat, to cover crop, to corn, to milo, to soybean, pea or alfalfa or repeat. Spring wheat, winter wheat, corn, or cover crop, corn, forage, sorghum mix, that's just another variation of the same thing. And that's really been our rotation sequence or variations of that for the last almost 30 years, 32 years. So it works very, very well for us. Let's talk a little bit about cover crops. You guys have heard 1,000 different things and about the good things about cover crops, and I have nothing bad to say about cover crops, other than I will preface it by saying we are in a moisture deficit area. And so you have to be aware of that at all times. You have to be aware of what you have in reserve going into that season because it can hurt you the next year. But year in and year out, we find that it cycles excess nutrients, uses excess soil water, even though sometimes we don't have excess. There are times that we do. Protects the soil surface. It's a living root extending out from your previous crop. It extends that living root out. Conditions the soil. It's bio-friendly. So when you have cover crops, you have the ability to enhance the population of microbiology that you have in your soil system. Creates habitat, and competes with all weeds, not just some of them, but all of them. It lowers our herbicide costs, promotes beneficial insects, creates great grazing opportunities. Some management tips. There's thousands of these out there too. We always try and plant a multi-species mix. Our carbon ratio, we always strike for 20 to 1 to 25 to 1, somewhere in that range. We try and incorporate at least 1 to 2 legumes. Always allow 5 to 6 weeks before killing frost to get enough root establishment. It's not so much top growth, it's root growth that you really want before freeze up. Avoid residual herbicides. That's something that's really hard for people to grasp because when they're thinking about their wheat herbicide program or their soybean or corn programs, they're not thinking about planting a crop right after harvest of that crop. You have to think in terms of what How is this herbicide going to impact cover crop if I plant it? Planting shallow, less than an inch into moisture. If you're not going to graze it or hay it, consider flattening it so that you can get more of that crop towards the soil surface to break it down. And that can be in the spring of the year. You want some snow catch if you can get it. So you can go back out there in the spring of the year and bust it down. Avoid fertilizing. And I really like and appreciate the data that Danny showed today. And we've done a little bit of that, we just haven't collected the data. But you will get some return on your investment if you do fertilize. But generally speaking, I like it to scavenge. I like it to scavenge. This is some 60-inch corn that we did in 2020. It looked really good, but we just ran out of rain. But it still ended up averaging about 100 bushel to the acre. I think some of you may have seen this field when you were at our tour a couple years ago. It ended up, we had 3 different fields of it. It ended up that we had mixed results. One field we saw a 12 bushel reduction compared to a 30-inch row without cover crop. In this case, we saw a 12 bushel increase, so that one worked. So it was kind of a mixed bag. It would be really great if we knew we could get consistent moisture in July and August. Yes, sir?
You know, you said you had one field that was 12 bushel length or less. Did you actually test the nutrient value of the biomass that was there?
Yeah, it wasn't enough to justify it. Nope, it wasn't.
My second question is how do you like that for hunting?
Not good. I mean, it's easy, but you don't hold birds. Birds like cover. They like to be protected.
So what did you have for a biomass under your cover for under your corn?
That was oats predominantly. There was rapeseed, hemp, cowpea. There was like 6 or 7 species. The oats was obviously the most prominent species in there. But once it got to this stage, it's at V6 or 7, V6 there, it kind of quit. Because we ran out of rain and it ran out of sunlight.
What year was that then?
2020. 2021, we did it again and it was a complete failure. I mean, complete failure. Less rain. You have to graze it though in order to justify it, and I've talked to a lot of different people that even in those fields that get a lot of moisture, you got to graze it to justify it, justify the cost offset, because you're looking at 45 to 50 bucks an acre in additional costs. You may hurt your yield, you may not. At any rate, you've got to be able to graze it to justify it.
We did it on one piece, and the biomass that we had underneath justified the difference in yield. And then it did work for great pheasant, but
Sure.
I think that was 19, so we had plenty of moisture,
Yeah.
and the pheasant was really awesome.
We are not going to give up on it. I think if we see a wet pattern again, we'll probably sneak back in and try it.
Somebody yesterday was talking about 2 rows on 30 inch and then skipping a row and having that 60-inch space to plant cover crops. And I said to my husband, so if you want to plant something the next year, if you do that, if you move over and put your 2 30-inch rows in that 60-inch gap, which should be fairly easy to do with today's technology, would that be something you would?
It certainly could be. We actually had a neighbor that, well, until he retired, did that 30, 60, 30, 60 on corn. He did it religiously, but the difference is he didn't put a cover crop in between. He'd go, his cover crop was a jug of Roundup, which didn't make any sense to me at all. And he didn't see any yield advantage, but for whatever reason he kept doing it. So I don't know. But yeah, I think that'd be fine. So this is one that I did in the fall of 2021 when we got lots of moisture. We cut our silage and we had VNS oats in the bin, so we threw it in a 15-inch air seeder and nothing else, just oats. I think we put out, 50, 60, 70 pounds of oats. And that turned out wonderful. I mean, that was a fantastic, that stuff there is 1.5 foot tall. And we grazed a lot of cattle on that, and it created a beautiful cover. Once we got that first freeze, it just, what was left from grazing, that is, it just created this beautiful mat. That, to me, is really important when you're removing so much carbon from the system, from silage. If we could do this every year, which we can't, that would be key to keeping that carbon level up in the soil system. We need to have a wet fall to make it work. Can't do rye. Yep. I'm a certified seed grower, so that just doesn't work for me. I wished I could.
What did you do with it fall and spring then?
So that got planted to soybeans in spring. Beans did great because it was grazed, so everything was kind of munched down, but we still had a nice armor on the soil. Yeah, the beans did really well. Yep. Great to plant into. It was beautiful. So, winter wheat forage will work too, and we've done that for a couple years. This year, none of the wheat came up. Zero. I had 3,000 acres of wheat planted, not a single kernel came out of the ground this year because it was so dry. But the winter wheat forage thing for us in our system will work great because I can go back on, usually we'll have 2,000 acres plus of silage ground. I can put winter wheat to it, graze it in the wintertime or late fall, come back, silage it in the spring, and then go back with another cover crop or soybean or something behind it. So I can, in a sense, double crop it. But you got to have that fall moisture to make it work. Capturing the nutrients, okay? That's what I wanted to see in this test. So we had a quarter section of winter wheat that we planted half of it to cover, half of it not. Soil tested it at that time when we planted the cover, and then again in the wintertime to see the results. And what we found was where we had cover crop, we actually added 0.5% of organic matter. Doesn't sound like much, but when you equate it to pounds of material, it's a lot. It's really hard to raise organic matter, isn't it, Danny? It's really hard to raise it. You said it best today. It's really hard to get there. It's hard to maintain it, but it's easy to blow it. But this is a great way of starting that process of building it up. We gained an additional 20 pounds of N where we had the cover crop because we had 0.5% more organic matter. We increased our soil water holding capacity by over 1/2 inch of more rain capture. That's worth a lot. We greatly improved our soil structure where the covers were planted. We saw that. We had potentiometer tests, and there was a huge difference between the two. And generally, we didn't see any negative impact. And that's what our results year to year show us, that generally speaking, we don't see a negative yield impact from planting covers on the next crop. Organic matter level, very, very important. It's one of the first things I look at in a soil test. We strive to be greater than 3%. 3% is my benchmark. That's when things really start to happen after 3%. Biology you have enough energy in the system to support good biological function. You get 20 to 40 pounds of N per percent of organic matter. It provides the fuel that the biological system needs to sustain itself. And for every 1% increase, we capture another inch of moisture holding capacity. So when we get those heavy rains, we can hold them. Organic matter matters. And this is a graph that goes back to 2009. And it shows you how this is all of our fields, average, right? How we went from 3.6, and then we had kind of a drought year in 12. Remember 12 was dry? You'll see it drop down. Then as we got into 2018 and 19 and 20, we bumped it way up there. Look at that, 4.89 farm average on 12,000 acres. That's impressive. That was amazing to me. But look how fast it went away. In 2 years' time, with not enough rain at the right time, today we're down to under 3%. That one hurt my heart because I haven't been that low for a long time. You can go clear back into 2000 or 2000, and I haven't been that low. So that one hurt. So it really matters. And we work very, very hard to try and keep that. There's nothing else there other than towards the bottom, we do not like to stack low carbon crops, peas, soybeans, and we don't plant sunflowers. We haven't for many years. But anything that's low carbon, we don't like to stack those like year to year. Yep.
On your graph there with that trajectory, what do you expect to happen when your drought situation ends? Do you expect to see that ramp back up, or what do you expect to see?
No, but it depends on the management that we do. If we have, and I'll show you some numbers here, but if we can induce cattle with cover crop, we can raise it quite quickly. But it's not going to happen overnight. The key thing is moisture. What I want to prove to the livestock guys is that we may be getting to a point in time in our operation that we've got too many cattle for the land resource that we've got. That's my concern. And if their goal is to sell 8,000 bulls by 2030, I keep telling them, guys, we need more land. We can't do this. We can't support that. Not without doing this. So, and they understand that.
So you're harvesting forages off your land and bringing them into your K4. Are you developing bulls, grazing them out there as well?
We're doing both. We're doing both when we can. And I'll get into those numbers in just a second here. Capturing the nutrients, this is phosphate. I haven't applied phosphate in a dry form in a large quantity since 1995. The only phosphate I use is a small 11 pounds in the furrow of orthophosphate. But what is interesting about this slide is where that same field that was half cover crop, half not, didn't apply any phosphate to it with the cover, but look what happened at the end of the year. Had 18 pounds more available P1 in that soil test where the cover crops were versus where there was no cover crop. Well, where did it come from? Well, it came from the soil system. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of nutrient there, guys, ladies and gentlemen, that is laying in wait. The key is biology. The cover crop simply gave the biology a host to live on and carbon sequestration from the sun, energy from the sun. And it extracted that nutrient for me. And that is why I don't care what my phosphate levels are on my soil test. I don't care. That same field, we did, Mike Lehman did a study. He's the USDA ARS lab. He did a mycorrhizal fungi study. Yes, Bryan? 5 minutes? Oh, boy. And this is what he found. Where the cover crops were, there was 3 times the level of spores than there were in the same field without cover crop. Again, mycorrhizal fungi activity is key in phosphate release. Phosphorus, Bray Pre-1s, I like to see them around 5 parts per million, not 30 or 40. P2s with the unavailable form usually will have 30 to 60 pounds. It's greatly influenced by AMF. If you have too much phosphate in the system, guess what? You're going to take down that biological activity. You're going to inhibit it. Base saturation levels, again, this comes to balance. These are the numbers I like to see, and that's usually where we fall. East River soils have a hard time getting to 80% calcium. That's really tough. Usually they're higher mags, lower calciums. It's tough. Just all this does is creates a wonderful environment for biology to thrive. Economically, we've reduced commercial fertilizer applications, herbicide use. We've reduced our equipment costs because we can do more crops over more acres, increased our planting windows. We use our savings to apply biologicals and foliar plant food treatments. We have more resilient crops in drier years. We've reduced our feed costs for livestock from cropland grazing, and we have healthier livestock because of it. This is a case study we did on winter wheat. This is not full farm, but this will give you an idea of what we can deal with our scenario. We had a yield goal of 70 bushels to the acre. The soil lab recommendation for that would be 175 pounds of N, and at this last year's price, that would have been $195 an acre. The recommendation for P was 50 pounds, or another 38 bucks, so a total of $233 just in N and P. Soil test results, I had very little residual, 9 pounds and 4 pounds, hardly even worth giving credit to. What we actually applied was 11 pounds of available P in furrow, 70 pounds sideband in the form of nitrogen and sulfur, some biology, some micros, and some foliars. For about 25 bucks, we got a total cost of $120.70, a difference of $112 and 80 bushel yield. It can be done. We do this consistently every year, guys. When I hear 2.2, 2.5 pounds per bushel on wheat, I can't comprehend that. I would have wheat just laying flat as a pancake. So it can be done. You have to have the confidence to turn it back. This is our fertility program on corn, milo, cereal grains. Run around 22 gallons of 30% with a quart of zinc side-banded beside the row, whether it's the corn planter or the air seeder, either one. Most everything gets 4 gallons of in-furrow orthophosphate. Everything gets biology. Some gets foliar if we need it. But that's our fertilizer program. We're not spreading anything on top or side-banding or anything. It's one pass, one shot. That's our air seeder, much like what we saw in Danny's presentation. The 1895, it's a smaller version, the 40-foot version, but we've had the 3-rank system since the early 2000s. Super efficient machines of getting your fertilizer placed, your seed placed. We got about 120 acre payload. Runs about a half a gallon per hour. It's a pretty cheap machine to run. We also have a single rank machine, single spaced, 15-inch space. We have liquid in furrow on that. It's a very light and nimble machine. We love it for cover crops and for soybeans. That's our planter, 24 row, new 2 years ago, electric meters, blah, blah, blah. It works really well for us. But again, we're putting 2 different fertilities down. The efficiencies of that is, it basically eliminates the separate fertilizer applications, which saves us about 65 grand a year. Makes more efficient use of the nutrients because we're not trying to change the world, we're only trying to change a small part of it, right around the seed. We see about 30 to 50% reduction in applied nutrient because of those application methods. It's more consistent, more uniform for the crop. And we create a acidified zone around the seed with the fertilizer, which makes the biological activity more efficient. Grazing livestock, cycling residues, adds biology to the system, lower feeding costs, key factor in overall soil health improvement, without a doubt. Here's a case study. Grazed 800 bulls between October 1 and March 1. That's a total of about 110,000 total grazing days on cropland and residues. We grazed a total of 2,880 acres. The cost per day was 74 cents per head. The cost per day in the feed yard, the same CAFO feed yard, was $2.83. That's $2.09 savings on those 800 plus bulls. That equates to about $230,000 in savings for us. $300 per head, or an additional $80 of income per acre. Those are big numbers. And that's why we are so competitive in the bull leasing world. Because we don't have to charge for the carry of those bulls as high as most people do. Here is a soil test of organic matter changes. The light green line is the grazed acres and the trend up. The dark green line is the not grazed acres. And you can see that there's about a 0.5% difference in trend, okay? That's big time. So that's why we want to try and get cattle on every acre. Whole farm organic matter where we grazed, we were right at 5.1%. Where we didn't graze, 4.7%. So that's big difference in the big scope of things. Biologicals, biostimulants, soil amendments, be careful. That's all I'm going to tell you, other than they work when everything's right, okay? There's a huge growth in that marketplace right now, huge. Every company is going to have a biological product out there. And there's lots of variations. There's acids, there's folic acids, there's biological materials, there's fungi, there's, oh my gosh, hormones. There's hundreds of different things. They can be very beneficial, but not always. They can help you lower your costs by less fertility. They can improve your nutrient efficiency. They can improve plant and soil health. There are no silver bullets. There's a lot of companies out there that have this product that says, oh, this is going to raise your yield 10 bushel. Guaranteed. Don't fall for that. Don't fall for that. Product should work in harmony with the natural system. That's the part that I can't really figure out yet. The biological material that I'm getting from a jug, is that hurting or helping my biological system naturally? I can't answer that. All I know is it's working. But I may be doing harm long term. I don't know.
Based on what, yield?
I don't know. That's the problem. How do you know? Because I really never benchmarked our natural system to know if I'm building it or depleting it. Find a research the companies and work with the ones that help you understand the whole system. Okay? Rather than just saying, I'm going to give you this product to build more yield. That's the last thing you need. Don't be sold on yield guarantees. Consider them like tools in your toolbox. You're not going to use them all, but it's sure nice to have them when you need them. Okay? But be willing to cut the other inputs. If you're going to go to the extra cost, the $10 to $20 to $30 an acre, to put some products out there, if you're not going to change your fertility program, don't do it. You're not going to change anything. Because you're still putting that system, your soil system, on welfare by applying those nutrients. You have to be willing to make the cuts. We don't really own the land, people, but rather we consider it a long-term lease with our next generation. Let's make sure that they get their soil back in better shape than when we took it over. Those are two of my grandsons that are of the 4 that Nick has. And I want to make damn sure that that soil will provide them a livelihood like I had. So, healthy soils, pass it on. Thank you.